Wow, what a time so far. And thank you for staying with us. We're going to discuss an important topic, at least important to me and certainly Convergence, and that's design funding. In particular, the ability for design funding to unlock innovations and really unleash the power of the financial sector to solve for good. Before we get into the details, let's start with a little bit of a story. Our story is about Sri Hartiwi. Sri is a rubber tapper in rural Indonesia. Sri has a family. She's a wife. She has 2 children, both girls. She also happens to be the primary breadwinner for her family. Sri works on a rubber plantation. That rubber plantation was formerly degraded land that actually was converted into a sustainable rubber plantation with a focus specifically on community and conservation. Sri is also a beneficiary of a program called the Tropical Landscape Finance Facility. This is a blended finance solution that is a public-private sector partnership originally, including partners such as UN Environment, along with ADM Capital and BNP Paribas. So what exactly is the TLF and how did it come about? I would like to say that the TLFF is an incredible example of the power of design funding. In particular, Convergence worked with the Tropical Landscape Facility to use grant funding to launch a bond that would specifically focus on investing in the preservation of land and building and restoring land for the purposes of sustainable rubber plantations. In this particular case example, the TLFF and the facility actually worked with Convergence to use design funding to build out a $95 million bond, a bond issuance that led to Asia's first corporate sustainability bond. That bond was subsequently invested in Sri's plantation and other parts of Indonesia. In this case in particular, too, design funding helped the facility and helped both the private and public sector partners early on design the financial structure. In addition, promote and developed what would be the construct around the parameters associated with the social and environmental measurements. So what is the significance of design funding for blended finance ecosystem more broadly? So it probably goes without saying that we're facing significant financing gaps in developing countries. There's a growing chasm between developing country needs and the financing flows available. In particular, with climate finance, it's on average about a $1 trillion gap. So, with respect to the design funding portfolio, we're a small but mighty portfolio that has created outsized returns with respect to innovation and driving capital. What do I mean by that? So over the course of Convergence's existence since 2016, design funding portfolio has programmed approximately $9 million of grants across 33 blended finance solutions that has resulted in $1.6 billion of private capital put to use towards closing these financing gaps. It is our belief at Convergence, and we hold this tightly, that design funding is critical to launch blended finance instruments, continuing to do so, as well as attracting the private capital necessary into the geographies, the people, the situations, problems, and challenges we face as a global community. So what exactly is design funding? How does it work? And all those fundamentals. It's been discussed here and there that blended finance solutions are complex. Are they too complex to even bother with? Probably not, because the return on blended finance is so incredible in terms of attracting the private capital necessary that we continue to focus and double down on what we would describe as the early stage seed patient capital, investing in those early stage innovations. Even though, at times, these are complex and time-intensive structures, the notion that design funding can step in the gap is incredibly important to the ecosystem. In particular, we realize that design funding is incredibly important to unlock rapid innovation. And ultimately, that's what we need, a next generation of financial products. We also need a continued demonstration that financial returns can happen alongside these innovative structures that are solving for good in order to send a signal and continue sending a signal to the investor community. Adoption. Design funding is invested in adoption. We're invested in replication. We recognize there's an importance in terms of adopting these financial structures into finance at large. And in addition, acceleration. So there's a leapfrog effect that needs to take place in order to transform financial structures and begin to mainstream blended finance into transformational finance. So having spoken a little bit about land, let's turn our attention to water. So the ocean at large represents more or less $1.5 trillion contribution to the global economy. That could increase to about $3 trillion by 2030. But we, as a community, have created and proceeded forward in a very unsustainable way with respect to this resource. We have invested very little to maintain marine preservation on a relative basis. And there's a lack of conservation associated with our oceans. So at Convergence, we stepped back and asked ourselves, what are the financial structures, approaches, and private sector activities that could be had in order to overcome some of these barriers? With that, we had the fortunate opportunity of using design funding in order to partner with the Nature Conservancy. With that, we were able to actually, through NatureVest, release a bond. It was a blue bond that we supported. At the time, it was one of the world's largest blue bonds, valued at $364 million. That bond was used by the Belize government in order to restructure their debt at a discount, which unlocks significant public resources in a sustainable way that they could continue to use for marine preservation. This instrument is now commonly referred to as a debt for nature swap. With respect to design funding, we helped step in the gap early on. Conversations were being had about the concept, the architecture, multiple stakeholders at the table. Design funding allowed for a landing place, for multi-stakeholders to have a real conversation about financial structures, begin ramping up, taking initial risks on what I would describe certain levels of experimentation, and beginning to innovate radical new solutions using traditional financial products. So with that, what's on the horizon for design funding? Well, we have a lot of activities at Convergence that are percolating, but there's one in particular I want to highlight today, and that is the Asia Climate Solutions Grants. Asia Climate Solutions Design Grants. I think I got that correct. We unfortunately have a mouthful with respect to some of our window titles, but with that, I want to highlight a number of things. Yes, Asia Climate Solutions Design Grant. So I want to highlight this in particular. One thing that's lacking, and I don't think it's lacking in this room, but generally is the notion of co-creation. And so Convergence, we were very excited to be joined at the hip with certainly both McKinsey, but also the Monetary Authority of Singapore in designing today, but then subsequently designing this window. And so what is this grant funding window meant to do? Well, first and foremost, continue to accelerate closing the climate finance gap with a particular focus on Asia. In addition, we want to recognize areas such as climate tech that are focused on early stage solutions to climate mitigation and climate adaptation, and developing an environment for more private capital to be attracted into those solutions in particular. So we invite all of you in the room to continue that journey of collaboration and continue that journey of co-creation as we launch this new vehicle. And thank you, too, to the Monetary Authority of Singapore for the seed support to actually stand this up and continue innovating important financial instruments that are solving for good. So normally, this would be the time that I might invite you on a journey. But instead, I'd like to invite you on a sprint. And before I do so, I want to point back to our original example, Shreve's Plantation, and the tropical landscape financing facility. Where is it today? Well, I'm very pleased to report that the $95 million bond has been repaid in full. It's also been repaid with financial return to investors. In addition, that investment helped to create about 4,000 new jobs for Shreve's community and train 3,600 farmers in that community, as well as create a sizable wildlife preservation, in addition to planting over 20,000 hectares of new rubber trees on formerly degraded land. So as we think about the sprint ahead, the sprint to the finish line, it's crucial, if not critical, to crowd in all of our ingenuity, all of our capabilities, and all of our collective knowledge. I think it was mentioned earlier today about the next generation of leadership in the financial sector. I would agree with that comment. I was someone working in Wall Street in my younger years, creating some of these structures, burning the midnight oil to do so. But now we're at a place where we're creating a sector, we're creating an industry, allowing the next wave of innovation to create the solutions that will attract the capital to solve some of the world's most complex challenges. So with that, the challenge today is how do we converge to build a robust, blended finance ecosystem, putting all of us, all communities, on a path towards sustainability and a resilient future. Thank you.